you talk about something that all gangsters have in common.
Yeah.
And I mean,
this has been a controversial chapter in this book.
I knew you were going to take heat for this as I'm reading. But so what is that thing that all gangsters have in common? And let's cut through the noise, because society doesn't understand what you're talking about in this book. But statistics bear it out. The scripture bears it out. Your own experience bears it out. So what is that need, and how does Christianity address it?
There's no detective there's no one who's worked juvenile crime. Now that sometimes is gang officers. Not all gangsters are juveniles, but you'll probably get involved a lot more in this. If you've worked juvenile crime or if you've worked gangs, you don't need me to make this case. You already know it's true. And by the way, in every survey that someone tries to present from a bias that tries to tell you it's not true, that's just not true, because you had a practical experience of this. And which I discovered was working gangs, is that we had so much diversity of gang members in our city that it struck me as odd. We had people who were living on very expensive homes on the west side, who come from they were driving Acuras as they were killing each other. We had people who were Hispanic, Black, white, Korean. We had people who were living in rich areas, poor areas, every section of the city. There just seemed to be no unifying factor. And I remember I was the older of my two partners in this car. My partner was a younger guy, and this is back in the 90s. And he had just seen Boys in the Hood, a movie about gang culture in the Crenshaw district of Los Angeles. And he said, you should watch it. And I'm like, I'm not watching another. Like, we work this every day. Like, I want to go home on my time off and
spend
watch gang movies.
My free time watching what I deal with.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not, but he's like, I respected him, and I felt like he was kind of not asking me. He was telling me I needed to do this. So I watched the movie with my wife, and the light bulbs went on for me. Because that's a movie that's really not so much it's about gang culture, but it's really about the importance of fatherhood. And I realized, whoa, hang on. Everyone I'm working suffers from the same malady, and it's not socioeconomic or ethnic or opportunities or systemic. It's lack of dad. Wow. It was so universal in the people I was working. Now, here's what's interesting. It's not like they didn't have a dad living at home. Often they did. They were from an intact married household. Lack of dad does not it manifests itself in a number of different ways. Sometimes it's that you never knew who dad was. Sometimes it's that dad has been locked up your whole life. Sometimes it's that dad's a detached, uninvolved alcoholic who's never off the couch. Sometimes it's that dad is a workaholic, a leader in the community, but never home. And that we had that. So I realized, and here I was with two young boys, and I thought, I'm working so much overtime right now because gang details kind of like that. So I thought, it's just a different version of lack of dad. It's no better than any other version of lack of dad. These people, if you'd have met the guys who were workaholics, you would have said, well, this guy's probably a good dad. No, he's never home. Because his character was such. You thought he has all the character components that would make a good dad. But if you're not engaged, it's still lack of dad.
It's not just who you are, it's what you do.
Sadly, well, not sadly, importantly, it's not just a character issue. It's an availability issue. Your best ability is availability. That's true in sports. It's also true as a dad. So it turns out that we have to own up to that, because the culture is telling us that really any family structure is fine. Because you can certainly find examples in any family structure where someone has succeeded. I think I'm one of those examples because I was raised with lack of dad. My parents divorced when I was 3, 1964. My mom never remarried. So during the 60s and 70s, 60s especially, that was not as common as it is today.
Right. And
I hated it. And I do know that looking back at who I am today, a lot of that's been shaped by the fact that I didn't have a good mentor growing up. So you have to really see. So for example, I clung to a mentor who was my grandfather, whose name is Warner Wallace, which is why I write as J. Warner Wallace, because Warner is the guy who, and my son's David, his name is David Warner Wallace. That name Warner is not just my cousins have named their kids. Warner had such an impact on our family that he ends up all over the place with people who didn't even know him because they were born years after he died.
Wow.
But that's the impact he had on our family. So so I needed to write a chapter just to kind of warn all of us who are men who think that the fact that we are still in the home somehow has protected our kids from lack of dad. It hasn't. We have to make that daily effort, and we have to resist a cultural. Right now, if you look at the statistics, the data on the increase of fatherless homes in America, you'll be shocked. We have to address this issue in the church for sure.
I think that it's a plot from the enemy. You know, as Christians, we believe in spiritual forces working for God and against God. And one of those forces would be, of course, Satan. And if I were Satan and I wanted to undermine a society and destroy a generation, I would try to take fathers out of the home and make them as detached as possible and come up with alternatives that don't meet that father hunger that we all have.
No, listen, it's not that mentors don't do a good job in replacing.
Absolutely,
my grandfather is not my biological father. He was a great mentor. The next best is that you find a way. Let's say you're married and your husband passes and now you've got kids and no father. Well, then the next best thing we do is we find those mentors, because mentors do help. That was my approach working gangs. I knew I couldn't be one of their peers. I couldn't hang out with these guys. I don't speak their language. I'm too old. I don't listen to their music, but I can mentor them as a paternal figure. So mentors do make a difference, but the data will show you that having the biological. Look, I have 2 kids that I adopted out of foster care. I am not their biological father. Now, I'm going to do my best, but it would be far better if I was their biological. Why? Because when you have your biological kids, you see things that you go, oh, geez, I know where he got that from, because you're seeing yourself and it's just a little bit, gives you a little bit of a leg up.
Wait, you have 2 kids that you've adopted out of foster care?
Yeah. So I'm not I have 2 kids that are biological children and I have 2 kids that are not. And I
didn't know that.
But it's important for us. And this is why, look, any family unit that does not include, this is the other controversial chapter in this book, which is about marriage, does not include 2 biological parents in a low conflict setting. That's the secret sauce to flourishing. 2 biological parents in a low conflict setting. Now, we would of course say we want a loving setting, but the secular data describes it this way. Okay, fine. Does not mean you cannot do well in different kinds of family units, because clearly I was not raised that way and I did not raise my entire family that way. So I get it. This is not shaming people who don't have it. This is about us saying, are we as a species willing to aim at something? Or are we just going to say anything you aim at? You can shoot at anything, it's fine. Or are we going to say, no, there should be a target, an optimal best case scenario that we could aim at? And by the way, it's not just like everyone thinks there is. Because if you think that no target that's your target, then. I mean, everyone thinks that some view of the world is the thing we ought to be striving toward.
Yeah.
So we're not any different than anybody else. But all I'm saying is that most wisdom books that are on the market are somebody trying to convince you that there's a better target.
Yeah, if you say that there's no target, then your target is self-actualization or authenticity or something like that.
It's still a target.
Yes.
Yeah.